thank you for
technical difficulties.
thank you for talking with me.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to talk about really Ragdoll in terms of my dissertation talks about culture, Britishness, and kind of international markets in television.
Okay.
It looks at CBBS and CBBC and their relationship with those markets. And what I thought was interesting was just to talk about the kind of success of Ragdoll, which has really gone from strength to strength.
Right.
This first kind of question I want to talk about was obviously Teletubbies is that kind of biggest success really, as it was a program which kind of ran from March 1997 to February 2001, 2002.
And I mean, it continues to be on air.
Yeah.
But I think the main production concluded at that point. Yeah.
And it's one of those programs which has really kind of had this enduring resonance with its audience. You know, it, like you said, is still around now.
Yes.
And that is one of those programs which has seen global successes. It's been kind of translated into 45 languages, 120 countries. It's also been broadcasted on.
Yeah, you've done your homework. Well done.
Yeah. Why do you think this? What do you think is down to the success of the program?
I mean, I think as program makers, you have to. I mean, the first thing you must always do is think about your audience, who you're making it for.
Yeah.
And I think Anne Wood and Andy, and particularly Anne, who created Ragdoll, the company, have a very good understanding of that audience.
Mm.
So the audience is the most important thing, and that's your starting point. I think if you were to say that Teletubbies, we went about it thinking, right, we're going to make this a global success. That's just not the way you think. You always focus on who it is, who is your audience. I think the interesting thing that's come up about Teletubbies is that we discovered through the success of Tubbies that the audience, 2-3-year-olds, are very much similar in their view and outlook all around the world, which is a really interesting fact. That children, when they get older, I think their perceptions do change because of their cultural environment that they grow up in. But there are more universal themes when they're younger, and I think that's one of the things that we discovered when making Teletubbies, that the audience respond in the same way, whether it be in Japan or whether it be in the UK or whether it be in America.
Brilliant. That kind of leads me on to my next question, just about the interest to take Teletubbies global. Was it a kind of priority at the time, or was it just something which was quite organic?
I don't think it was. I don't think, to be absolutely truthful with you, I don't think it was organic as such, but there was an expectation to distribute this program internationally, purely because. And you, as a program makers, we had to consider that. Yeah. The before that program, Teletubbies, Ragdoll had made programs like Tots TV and Rosie and Jim. And particularly with Tots TV, it had a second language to it.
Yeah.
So we used that show as a kind of an introduction to the States, so people got to know that we were a company that made kids shows and what have you. And Teletubbies was a kind of our next kind of follow-up to those broadcasters, because it is about building relationships with broadcasters. So there was obviously a major intention that we would sell the program around the world, but to be honest with you, as the show got its notoriety and interest in the audiences, that interest grew, and I think more territories opened up to us because of the success that emerged from the show. So I mean, the underlying intention was there, but to tell you that we were going to distribute to 140 odd countries or however many it was, wasn't the kind of main priority. It was more. There was a bit of organicness, but within that there was an intention to make it, to be mindful about the global audience. That makes sense.
In kind of as we see a ever capitalised kind of world, do you think there's an increasing pressure to make programmes which will succeed internationally and that is internationally viable?
I think in the economics of broadcasting, for our genre, you have to think you have to think of it as a global market. You can't just think of it as a UK.
Yeah.
I mean, broadcasters will contribute towards the programme, but they won't give us the full amount. Not that they don't want to, but it's the economic climate at the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the interesting things that emerged, Teletubbies was quite a unique case because at the time, believe it or not, there were only kind of 4 main terrestrial channels.
Yeah.
Now, the broadcasting climate is completely different. The landscape is completely different. There are, I don't know how many hundreds of different channels. There are hundreds of different channels, but the revenues are very much similar. So that means that the overall finance of all those channels is kind of, that money is diluted and fragmented over all the different channels. So new economic models have to be thought about. And in the kind of work that we do, I mean, in children's, you can't just make 5 or 6 shows, particularly for preschool. You have to consider them in blocks of 25, 50 to make it viable. That all the various auxiliary stuff can go alongside it to recoup the cost of the show. You know, because you'll get some money from the broadcaster, but you'll have to also get money from distributors as well, who will invest in it to just to fund the work. So it becomes more of a film model where you've got various different partners all kind of coming in and investing in the show.
We've seen kind of ITV withdrawn a little bit from the market, taking it from ITV. Obviously working with CBeebies, do you think that they should prioritise their domestic audience before or over an international one? Is that really the goal?
Well, I mean, I think it's you can't, I think it's a very, what do you mean by, what's underlying that question? So I can kind of focus in on what you're actually saying. Give me some more specifics on that question.
Oh, yeah. Well, CBeebies has done, say compared to CBBC, has done it's done better in its programmes going worldwide. You see on BBC Worldwide, there's other shows like other shows which have worked in terms of their format. I think that's obvious within The Night Garden as well, that kind of success. Do you think that just in what they are making, that it should be more relevant to kind of the domestic audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're always, the shows, where the shows originate, always have a cultural resonance, I think. In The Night Garden, Teletubbies, all have cultural resonances, I think, with its territory, the UK. The balance that you have to achieve is keeping that cultural reference, but also having an appeal for your international audiences. So you've got that kind of dichotomy where you kind of think locally and also internationally at the same time. I mean, at the end of the day, the things that influence you are the things around you. When you're writing and being creative, you can't help but being influenced by things that you see in everyday life. I think in the contemporary world, this is my own perception, I think there are more things, because of the effectiveness of communication like email and Skype and all these things that link us all up together, there are more common references than there used to be. I mean, if you take architecture, for instance, contemporary architecture these days is very similar all around the world, So I think there are many things that are very global. But if you look at in The Night Garden, for instance, there are lots that are global. However, we decided to use Derek Jacobi. Well, he's a very cultural reference. I mean, he's one of our top leading Royal Shakespeare. I mean, he's got Royal experience in the Royal Shakespeare. He is a very British. Wonderful performer. Do you know what I mean? So he's a very iconic. I think sense culturally, but he has resonance all over the world.
Yeah.
So you have to really think carefully and be mindful of that.
Yeah.
And also, you mustn't forget. I mean, the work that we do is very specialist. We make certain styles and specific styles of shows. Okay.
Yeah.
If you think about CBeebies output, they do all sorts of other shows that
Yeah.
are very much representative of our local culture.
Yeah.
So if you look at the broadcasting as a whole, I would say that there are lots of elements within that, in little inserts they do of children's activities. And I think I've seen one show which is kind of a little kind of documentary about a primary school that was set in the UK that's very relevant to the culture. And of course they have, they are... it's taxpayers' money that funds that show. It's very important they represent the culture, and they are very sensitive to that and mindful of that. So, but if you can't, but for us, we have to think about it in a business context. We don't get any funding from the government at all. We are a wholly commercial outfit. So, the broadcasters will give us a certain amount, but we work with distributors as well. So to get the funding, we have to consider that from a global market perspective.
Yeah. As you mentioned earlier about Tots TV, the character of Tilly, which was in it, when it was originally broadcast, her character was French.
That's right.
Originally, and then when it went to America, it was Spanish.
Do
you think that in kind of that as a good example, that American audience, say in particular, would look for a show which could be localized? Is that really one of the, because you've got kind of the Britishness, really the British element that I think kind of doesn't work sometimes, and that's kind of proven in terms of CBBC's struggle.
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree with you. It's something that we're always mindful of, and it's something you learn. You don't always, but you always have to be mindful of it. I mean, in America, I don't know what the actual statistics are. I can't quote you on that, but actually, globally, Spanish is a far more spoken language than French is. But from our perspective in the UK, French was seen as at the time when it was made, as a very important language. I mean, it is a very important language, but it was seen to have more prominence. But when you're showing it to America, where they've got Mexico and Spain, Spanish has more of an influence. So at the time that we made that show, the Tots TV and Rose and Jim, it's interesting actually, because they have, when we did Teletubbies, there was a different shift in perception. When we did Tots TV and Rose and Jim, the need to think about the international market wasn't as great. We had better funding in terms of the broadcaster could fund more of the work, and therefore there was less of the need to think of it in a bigger market, so we could think more at the time, specifically for the UK audience.
Yeah. One of the biggest concerns, which when I've spoken to other people on this matter, between CBeebies and CBBC, there's a lot of issues surrounding that kind of gap in the market between branding and crossing that line between CBeebies and CBBC. For the future and kind of moving it into a digital kind of ecology, why do you think that's hard to kind of target that market?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, the whole market has been created. I mean, the BBC decided to create these brands, CBeebies and CBBC, for one thing. So by doing that, you segment the audience. So there is this, and they're not alone. I mean, Nickelodeon have done it with Nick Jr. and Nickelodeon, and Disney have done it with Disney. They've all done it. So all these companies have decided to fragment the audience. Now, on one hand, it's understandable because obviously the cognitive development of a child of 3 to a child of 12 is vast, isn't it? So I think that it is. I think all the audiences are really, really important, and there is a need for shows that are aimed at the kind of 5, 6, 7 bracket that perhaps fall through the gap between CBeebies and CBBC. I mean, partly that is to do with the perception of the child, who quite naturally, at a certain age, maybe 6, and I know definitely by 7, will see CBeebies. I'm sure by 6 actually, will see CBeebies as they push away from those kind of babyish elements and want to aspire to CBBC. But even with Disney and Nickelodeon and CBBC, that older age group focuses on audience top end of 10, 11, 12 on issues that actually those younger kids can't really relate to or really, understand at that stage.
Yeah.
Is it the broadcaster or is it program makers that don't seem to really? I think the key thing is if you create a show that has appeal for that audience, then they'll watch it.
Yeah.
I do accept that where it's placed is important. So you don't want it on the CBeebies channel because it will, or the Nick Jr. channel because it will be reflected as younger. But if you put it on that older age group but aimed it at a key audience of sevens, then I think you will draw the audience.
Yeah.
From a broadcaster's perspective, of course, what they'd love is to have this bridging shows that would take them from CBeebies seamlessly onto CBBC.
Yeah.
I think children of that age group tend to leave the CBeebies and don't, from my understanding, go straight onto CBeebies. They've got other avenues in which to explore.
Yeah.
These things could be possibly YouTube or I'll just simply use DVDs to watch stuff. Or, CITV, I think, have some success. They seem to be carving out a little niche from the audience, from the children I talk to. They seem to watch a lot of CITV shows, and they seem to kind of hit a genre. So it's not a cut and dry situation, but I definitely see there's a great commercial opportunity there for this age group. But I don't, and it's just understanding this audience and what they really, really want and engage in, and it's a very difficult audience to get right for, I think. But I think when you do, it's incredibly rewarding. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. Yeah. As you kind of mentioned about digital and these television programs being on Sky and Nickelodeon and all those American imports in particular, what's the necessity for public service broadcasting for children? Because obviously there's been a lot of debate about its relevance still. What does that mean to you?
Oh God, for me it's very important. It's very important. There are many, many things that the BBC do wonderfully, and I think I worry that due to the difficulties the BBC had, and they are quite justified to have that criticism put on them.
Yeah.
But I don't want it to be devalued to a degree because it's one of those things that if it's gone, we'll miss it.
Yeah.
The thing that the BBC bring to us, and you pointed out earlier, is a cultural identity. And I think, it's interesting. I think we live in a more global market, and the more global more global market there is, the more need there is to have a cultural difference, to feel a sense of identity. And I think the BBC, in their work, is very, very important that they do that. So that's the first factor, UK-based productions, because, they have been the contributor of many wonderful talent that we have in this country. And not only that talent that is encouraged to develop, which it needs to be. You can't just make things overnight and expect it always to be a success every time. They need to learn to make mistakes, but develop talent within the culture of the BBC that takes risks. You will benefit long term, and those successes that we all think happened overnight, which never did, taking a lot of time, benefit the economy so much. The amount of revenue those channels, those brands bring into the UK is huge, and it's a tremendous, and it's a distinctive thing. It's a very unique thing that we have, that we're able to make programs that have a global reach, and that's one of our strengths as a country and a distinction about it that a lot of other countries haven't had, and that's something that should be supported. In this economy where we're having to, the government are so pressured on how can we generate more money for the country, how can we do that? Well, we need to really focus on the things that we shine and are distinctive on, because that has a real value to this country. And for that reason, the BBC from a cultural perspective and for developing new talent, I think is critical and should be supported. I think absolutely they should be scrutinised and have that kind of transparency, which I think and I think inevitably big organisations do wrong for themselves, but they are offering a very important contribution to broadcasting landscape and to our culture, I think.
Brilliant. That leads me on to my final question, which is really about independence. Obviously, there's been lots of independent companies which have gone down and had to withdraw themselves in the past couple of years.
Yes.
How important is that to kind of keep culturally these to keep the industry thriving? Is it that the BBC are able to work with independent companies as well?
Yeah, I mean, I work for an independent company, so that's critical. I mean, that's my first thing I'd say to you. But I mean, I think we have Channel 4 to thank for the independent market, because and that's down to Margaret Thatcher, who encouraged the Channel 4 to be created. And what it's done is it's created independent companies to make work, and that work is made in a different kind of culture that you would get in a massive corporation.
Yeah.
So what an independent production company gives is a quite unique perspective to developing work based on the core talent that is within it,
right.
Depending on the scales of the independents. Now, a lot of independents now are being bought up by other big multinationals and kind of satellites, and But when you're an independent, you really, I mean, for us as a company, it's incredibly hard to keep going, and it's becoming harder and harder to keep going because the climate is so tough. The finance of shows is so tough that it is incredibly hard to keep going. But if you are able to support independents, they do make work which is distinctive, because as an independent, you know that your business is resting on new, good, fresh ideas that are different and distinctive. You have to compete with other companies, so you really are. It creates competitiveness, which I think focuses the mind and gets the best work, as long as it's done in the right way. Gets the best work out of people. And it's efficient as well, because as an independent, you're also mindful of cost and efficiency and how to do things. So that kind of culture provides very interesting and unique broadcasting, and it develops talent in a way that, I mean, for certain kinds of talent, it's great. So I think for a diverse and market that can create original work, which I think is a very important aspect in keeping the general public interested in valuing broadcasting. I think having independence from that point of view is a key. Brilliant. Whether that will continue is just down to the marketplace, unfortunately. It's market forces, but I feel that us as independents can really make and apart from that, I mean, lots of great independents make very unique work, and being the independent, they can really kind of focus on that work, nurture it, and develop it in a way that I don't think you could in a massive corporation.
Yeah. Christopher, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Answers were brilliant. I'll make sure to send you a paper when I'm done with it.
Good luck. Well, I wish you well with it. Good luck with it.
Thank you. Take care. All right. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.